Hello, and good morning or afternoon or whatever it happens to be. Welcome to a new little series here that I like to call Profiles and Tacticalness. Look at how one class in Tactics Ogre essentially handled itself throughout the entire series, and how it's been changed in one vision. So, first of all, I figure a good place to start is the Knight here. The old, I would say humble, but they're probably not very humble, guy in armor. Essentially your mainstay tank throughout most of the series, although it's a little bit arguable earlier on. So we might as well start with Ogre Battle back in March of the Black Queen and OB64. So essentially, they were your kind of your basic frontline guy after your fighter, your first frontline fighter guy that you were likely to have leading a squad. So two attacks in the front, one in the back. They got a healing ability once they got promoted to a paladin, but that wasn't going to happen for a little bit of a while, and you had to kind of stick with the politics in order to allow that to happen. So, moving on. Once they actually got to Knight of Lotus, the Knight and Paladin were kind of mashed together. That was the healing variant from the earlier OB games there. So they started getting their healing abilities, and that's when they started falling into the quote unquote boring but practical category, wherein you could field an entire squad of only knights if you wanted to, and you'd be perfectly safe doing so. They'd be able to probably carry you through the entire game. You would slowly whittle everything down, and with the healing abilities, you'd be able to pretty much carry your way through there. I will say, though, that the sound effect on those healing abilities was a little bit painful on the ears, but, it is what it is. Now, I should point out, in the original Let Us Cling Together back on the SNES, they actually did not have a healing ability. As I understand, they may have possibly been inspired by either the GBA game or a popular mod that came out at the time. Well, more of a hack than a mod. I guess same difference if you think about it, but they essentially gave the healing abilities to knights. In the original Let Us Cling Together, they kind of needed it though. They were a bit on the weak side. Most of your melee units were actually a little bit on the weak side, just because, well, archers could pretty much take them out at range. Casters could take them out at range. By the time they got close, their slowness usually got them killed. So, by and large, if you were doing an Iron Man run or something like that, your knights probably didn't survive too long. Now, then we get to the Lucked remake. That's when they fell very sharply into the boring but practical category. So they were your mainstay tank throughout most of the game. They did a pretty fantastic job of doing that. Unfortunately, this also was one of the things that made them bad at their job, as strange as that sounds. Uh, Essentially, what happened, they had ridiculously high defenses. You could pack on a bunch of heavy armor, and on top of that, they had an ability called Phalanx, which would essentially take away 90% of all damage that they took. Now, you may recognize this ability as that one that was probably the cause of a few character injuries over the course of your first run, because you'd be going for that leader that was a knight. It's like, they just need one more hit, and then they turn on Phalanx, and like 6 turns later, he's still sitting there. That that ability was much more annoying than it was ever actually useful on the player side. Basically, unless you had your knight go and sit in a stairway or something like that, usually you would turn on Phalanx. They would become completely unusable for multiple turns, and well, at that point, they've probably already just walked around your knight instead of actually bothering to fight them. One guide in particular I saw noted that usually if you wanted your tank to actually do their job, you're better off just sending them in with a sword shield and otherwise butt naked. So perhaps not the most elegant way to do things. Now, moving on. Onto my favorite variant of this guy, and we're actually going to switch over to the PSP for this. The One Vision variant. So, the One Vision mod obviously went ahead and made everybody better at their job. Usually did a pretty good job of referencing the rest of the series. Generally just, made them better at what they do. Now, if we go ahead and take a quick peek at their abilities here, we can see how they've changed. So first of all, I should note that in the original game, obviously they had Rampart Shadows. However, it should be noted that those Rampart Shadows were functionally, you were very unlikely to use them. They had a one-tile range. Even if once you got your Rampart auras all the way to the top, even if you put one down, they would probably not have too huge of an effect. They came in at a cost of 75 TP, which basically meant you were at best putting one out every 2 turns, and it wasn't worth it. You were better off just waiting for a kill move, having them go and try to fight something outright. So, How this has changed in One Vision? This is the new Phalanx, essentially a cheaper version of the original Rampart Shadow, almost half the cost, double the range, so you can actually effectively put them where you want to put them, instead of awkwardly putting your knight somewhere, putting down a shadow, then usually having everybody run all the way around both the knight and the shadow, only to find out that there was really no point in putting it down in the first place. It's one of those moves that was well intentioned, as it was likely to have been put in place as kind of a multiplayer feature, where you would go and you would put down, you would essentially put down a barricade of sorts, and essentially both sides would presumably go and set up the map in their favor, just like you would with barricades on rune fencers and that kind of thing. It's just one of those abilities that, again, was seemingly balanced for multiplayer and not really figured out for single player. Now, other abilities, Guardian Force, they still have this. It's, I believe, a little bit higher cost. This essentially allows them to absorb hits for everybody that's around them. Functionally, this removes 25% of all incoming damage, and on top of that, essentially allows a very, very tanky unit. I believe they're either the first or second place as far as health potential for humanoid characters. So essentially allows this very tanky unit to go and take the hits for any squishy units nearby them. Absolutely one of their mainstay abilities. You have Rally here, which is pretty much a counter to a lot of the things that a Terror Knight would be able to do. So, for example, they come in with a stun, they come in with a fear. This essentially is a 2-tile AoE that will get rid of all stun, all fear, and charge TP in that area. It's a little bit of a time costly thing to use, as you see over here. Essentially, a lot of their abilities take a lot of cause a lot of delay for them. Again, they're not very fast, but they can do a lot of amazing stuff. Then you got Aegis. So they no longer have access to healing. They actually had healing in the base game. That was probably one of the main things you used them for. Usually most of their base game damage came from counterattacks. In this case, Aegis is a small heal, I would say about 3/4 of what the original was. Plus they get regen, plus they get access to Fortify. So Fortify and Strengthen, you very rarely ever... Actually, no, I believe there's no way to actually stack those anymore. So base game, what you would do is, for example, you would have Strengthen 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. on your character, and then you would have another Strengthen on top of that. That's all just built into the characters and their equipment, so strengthen and fortify all that a lot more noticeable. So Aegis is absolutely fantastic. It doesn't really cost that much recovery-wise. You can basically just use it every turn. You can have an entire party running on regen. It's great. Other than that, they have the pretty standard kind of stuff you'd expect a knight to have. They've got all of their abilities right here. I should I should note that Recruit is actually fantastic on a knight. Due to the fact that they have their high armor, they have a very very high tendency to be up in the front lines. So if there's a wounded unit, obviously they can run up, say they didn't quite get the kill on a guy, they're like, okay, fine, join us. You survived. How about it? Come join us. And honestly, it's worth it. This ends up ranking up much faster than you would possibly expect, and it is very, very worth it. Essentially, this allows you to completely turn a fight. You have a guy either that's going to take a hit for you, or you're essentially going to have an extra unit in that fight. It's fantastically useful. Tactician, would definitely recommend it on them. Um, Obviously, they use a lot of TP abilities, so very good to have. Max TP, this I would recommend primarily if you have a hammer or axe user as your knight. Just because that way it would allow them to stack up more points to be able to use for those more damaging kill moves. Field Alchemy, they get access to all items, but they do not gain access to the ability to throw them. So you can use them all at close range if you want them to. They can be a pretty reasonable doctor. You get Siege if you want them to be a charging sort. You get Steadfast if you want them to not move anywhere. Sanctuary if you're fighting zombies, if that's your sort of thing. Jump and Wade if you want them. You get all of your usual wards. You get Clarity and Efficacy, although I don't really think those two are worth a slot. You get your Bash abilities if you want them to be good at pushing guys back. Actually, Bash can be very good if you get it up to 100% here, and you have somebody that's countering a whole bunch. If you have somebody that's very good with counters, it allows them to build up their TB a lot faster, and also allows them to go damage more units at a time. Also potentially allows them to stack 2 or 3 units kind of in a bubble of phalanxes, which I'll explain in a little bit. Counter hits, they get up to 75%. Rampart Aura, they get all of them, and they actually even get an Instill ability. So, yet another free move ability that allows them to get a little bit more damage on their weapon. Odds are you'd be using Augment Light on them anyway. And alright, lastly, their weapon choice. So they get one-handed swords. Bear in mind those also have a two-handed variant now. You get access to axes. Basically, you have your standard ones that give breach. You've got your bearded ones that will reduce enemy speed. You've got your spears, both the 1 to 2 tile range and the 2 to 3 tile range, and your hammers. Those are for both stun and knockback. Now, personally, I prefer knights with spears and swords. Axes and hammers are very good for spreading around debuffs, especially if you're having them hold an area and primarily do counterattacks. But either way, it's up to you. There's a fair bit of flexibility in what they can do. You can pretty much base it all around their base abilities, and they will take you very far. So, personally, I think that a squad of about 2 to 3 in each party is going to be ideal, just kind of scaling up or down depending on how you want them to do things. Just because even 2 of them are usually going to be enough to cover a pretty large area of the map. Like, I'll go ahead and speed this up a little bit, just so we can get through this a little faster. But essentially, if you have Rampart Aura 4 on them, and you have them putting down shadows, all it takes is maybe 2 or 3 phalanxes to cover up maybe half the map, depending on how you put them. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be a permanent solution to your issue, but still, it's going to be enough to hold that area for a good long while. So, for example, I want this archer dealt with, so I'll go ahead and deal with him with just one of these units. I'll have one of them run up here. This will essentially cover up this entire right side. So all it takes is 2 of them to completely cover this side. I actually went for this map in particular because it's got a very wide amount of space to cover. So we'll take Little John here, who I am not actually selecting. Okay, alright then. We'll have Cecily here move up. Now, the way that I like to do this is to set them up in a kind of staggered pattern. Unfortunately, he went ahead and ruined that a little bit here. But if you've ever played chess, there's essentially a strategy with the pawns in which you would go and you'd set up a kind of stagger pattern. So, for example, ideally 2 of these would be facing up. Unfortunately, because that one got moved backwards, I went ahead and put them in a line. But the idea is you trap their units in a little bit of a sort of tooth shape, and then as soon as everybody gets their counters, the following turn you drop a bunch of phalanxes behind them. So this is why, personally, I don't usually go for knockback builds, but this can work either way. Like, for example, if you have a weaker knight, you give them a hammer with a knockback ability. You knock them backwards, drop a phalanx, that guy is now behind your wall. You can have them go do something else. So for example, if any of your guys ever gets low on health, simply enough, just drop a phalanx, have them retreat, have them recover, maybe use an item. They can just get right back in the fight with no real issues. So she's not going to have the range to make this happen, so we're going to go ahead and just put her right here, guard this flank. We're going to have him run over here. We've got a nice little circle type situation going. And we finally got one running up in front here. So now we got Little John back. If you want accuracy, like if it's your main concern, swords are actually going to be one of the by far better things that you can do for them. Since swords inflict stagger, they also have a little bit of an accuracy bonus innately. So this essentially allows you to get pretty decent accuracy, like right there, I believe you had 100%, in the rain, just attacking the guy from the side, which is pretty darn fantastic. Now, this is your Aegis ability. As you can see, it gives a heal of about 30. This is actually one of the things that I heard mentioned a couple times, of, the heal is removed, this ruins my strategy. As you can see, it's almost as good as the base heal just outright. Plus they get regen, plus they get fortify. It's way better. You don't get stuff like heal 3, so you can't spam a bunch of those over and over. I should note that heals in general in this game or in this mod rather, have been reduced to the point where very few classes actually get access to them, because they are much, much stronger. So, as you can see, with all of this Rampart Aura, he's covering that entire yellow area by himself. This one over here is covering this entire area, so anything approaching from the front will only be able to engage him. So once these other units start actually showing up, It's basically going to be a bit of a little wall situation. So right here, all it takes is one hit, and they will usually have enough to drop Phalanx. Unfortunately, he was 3 points shy. That'll happen. But at any rate, they still have access to all of their abilities. I don't believe. I think I only had three of these units have items, but you don't always even need them. I mean, you basically got all of your healing that you're ever going to need from Aegis. So yeah, it'll do a pretty fantastic job for you. Let's go ahead and have him sit right there. So, as far as Aegis itself, I believe it heals anywhere from 5% to 10%, something like that. Typically, it's going to be about 5 to 30 health that it ends up healing. It seems to be a bit of a different amount per each time, and it functionally works the same way that poison does, except in reverse, because obviously it's pretty much the opposite of poison, but hey. So we're going to see a little bit of slowdown every now and then from the emulator. That's mostly the fault of a new computer here. I'm still figuring out all the settings, so it's nothing too huge to worry about. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the frontline negotiator is something that would be fantastic in a case like this. Obviously, not all of your fights are going to be the reason away, but it should be noted that in these kinds of cases, there's a lot of units that are just going to end up just shy of being killed off, and aside from the fact that it's giving you another unit, it essentially just puts together a type of situation where you're basically going and getting a kill that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten. I mean, yes, they're joining you, but I'm saying in terms of overall practicality, that's kind of what you're accomplishing. That you're getting that unit removed from the fight in some manner. All right, so in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and pop one of these. Unfortunately, this bastard right here is quite lucky. By the looks of it, he's having a very lucky day. You may notice a little bit of slowdown. I'm not entirely sure what's causing that right now. We're just having a little bit of a performance issue. That'll happen. That'll happen. New laptop. It doesn't know what to do in public. It's a real shame. He's trying so hard. Anyway, there we go. 35%. Luckily nailed it. There is a limit on how many of these phalanxes you can actually put down, unfortunately. So it maxes out at 10, I believe. It's either 9 or 10. And once you get to that point, it will suddenly start saying that they failed. Again, if you have that many out at that point, you've probably already got control of the map, so there's not really a whole lot to worry about there. Now, it's usually not advisable to stick one unit way out in front like this, but I mean, look at this. It's just a complete wall that they basically have. Well, not even a wall. It's just a maze that they have to get through. So the main weakness of the knights here is mostly made up for by their regen. So that's their just innate absolute slowness. As you can see, they are taking quite a hot minute to actually accomplish anything. So there we go. We're going to put that phalanx right there, prevent him from going back up here. So, as you can see, pretty much getting absurd area control can just deal with these in whatever order is seen to be fit. Let's go ahead and have you just run over here. There's a small chance for that. Bear in mind, they do still have shields, and shields are actually fantastic attacking things now. So, for example, you give them a stunning shield, you give them a silencing shield, they can essentially go around spreading debuffs. I mean, you can have an entirely debuff-based knight. For example, if you have a silencing shield and a hammer, like I did on that lady, if you've got a decent chance with a hammer, good. You've got a decent chance for a stun. If you have a silencing shield, that will essentially allow you to just run up and silence a caster. There's a pretty good chance of that happening. So it's pretty fantastic stuff. They're easily one of my favorite classes. There's a whole lot that they can accomplish, and they're very good at adapting to different roles. So there's all that goodness. Like I said, it's probably the most advisable thing I could give on all of these. I think it's a DX11 issue that's causing all this. I don't know. I'll find out later. Either way, after multiple attempts, I just wanted to basically get this series started. But the long story short, I think swords and spears are generally what I'm going to use more than most other things. By the way, there's Shadow Break. That is the one thing you have to worry about from the AI, because they do know to go use Shadow Break on those phalanxes. So if you're facing Terranites, you see that they have Shadow Break, don't pile your units around your phalanxes. You can use them as a wall. They'll usually get distracted and go after your phalanxes instead of your units, which is fine, but bear in mind that Shadow Break now makes them explode. So they will essentially do the equivalent of just going and hitting them with whatever their melee weapon is to each unit that's around that guy. So always be a little bit scared of those guys. Right here, swords proving to be really fantastic against fairies. Actually, that's one very sharp note for when it comes to what kind of equipment they want to give your knights. If you're going to have a guy that's essentially hanging around the periphery, potentially, whoops, sorry, resize the window a little bit there, a little bit of an issue. But if you're going to have somebody hanging around the periphery and fighting some of the weaker units, definitely want to consider having a knight with a sword there. Essentially, it'll just help them with their accuracy and all of that sort of thing. So here we go. Essentially, we have two of their weaker units now, the ones that are causing all this trouble in the front. They kept retreating and healing and all of that, so now, essentially, they're trapped in a little bubble. They can't go anywhere. So, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. And alright. So, I think you can pretty much get the point of what I'm trying to say here. These guys are absolutely fantastic. They'll do a good job in dang near any role they want to put them in, but they will go ahead and they will just make walls like no other. You know, you can like I'm doing right here, just set up an entire area like this. Actually, I've had multiple cases where I've had fights get completely won out of pretty much no chance to win anymore, just because I went and set up a bunch of friggin' phalanxes, locked away the leader, and then just punched him down with an otherwise really weak unit. So you can pull some serious shenanigans with these phalanxes. Again, their cheapness is pretty friggin' great. You can do a lot of good stuff with keeping everybody going with Aegises. Essentially, until you can get a proper heal, they're a perfect band-aid and defensive move. And again, if you have anyone that gets stunned, you have a bunch of guys stunned or scared or whatever else. I mean, you got Rally, that'll get rid of that ability, or that debuff, and it'll even give them a little bit of TP to boot. So there's really, really no negative to using those. And again, only downside is their speed. So they get access. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. That as far as armor goes, they get access to all the heavy stuff, but they do still get access to medium armor. So if you want to make a evasive build, that's perfectly well doable. At any rate, I think that about sums up everything that I wanted to say about these guys. So have a good one, and if you have one in particular that you want to see done next, let me know. Otherwise, I will essentially do them in the order that I think people will encounter them. And all right, have a fantastic day. See you then.